Okay, Dan, Jennifer, you're both deeply involved in global supply chains. That's the sharp end, the front pointy end of all of these issues around globalization. Can I get you to each start by telling us a little bit about what your organization does?
Yeah, I'll start. Hey everybody, so I'm the founder and CEO of Convoy. Convoy is a digital trucking company. We connect about 100,000 mom and pop small trucking companies around North America with large shippers, Costco, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, that move freight. And we do that with a digital platform. Before Convoy started, there were about 18,000 middlemen, brokers in the country that were connecting truck drivers and shippers. And we built a digital solution for that so we can automate the process and work directly with all the really long tail small carriers and owner operators to get them plugged in.
Yep.
Jennifer.
Thank you. So hi everybody, Jennifer Bisceglie, founder of Interos. And let me explain what we do in context of a customer. So when the unfortunate situation of Ukraine-Russia broke out, our customers were able to go to our tech platform and understand where they were connected to Russia. And so if you think about a situation of a global supply chain, and you think about the fact that there's almost 3,000 sanctions right now that are being laid globally against Russia, companies really do not know if they're doing business with Russia or not. They might know if they're directly sourcing from them, but not extended.
Yeah.
And so our customers were able to come into our platform where we map and monitor about 350 million business entities globally and understand where were they connected to Russia, not just who they were directly sourcing from, but in the extended supply chain.
Yeah. So you both described some fairly technical pieces of work that you do. It feels far removed from politics, and in fact, I'm sure for the majority of your careers, it was non-political stuff that happened in the background. And it was put to me this morning that this era of benign globalization, the one that's driven by economics or the efficiency of supply chains, it's kind of over, and now we're in this politics-driven globalization. Would you agree with that assessment? Is that something that you're feeling, when you come to your desk each day and have to deal with all the challenges now that exist around those supply chains?
Yeah, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think, so it's a great question, and I think as we talked about actually getting ready for this panel, it plays really well in the headlines, right? The end of globalization, the importance of nearshoring and reshoring.
Yeah.
But I think if we all have a reality minute, it's actually the era of transparency.
Yeah.
So it's become more important than ever to understand who you're doing business with, who they are doing business with, and whether it's a good or a bad thing. And when I talk about a good or a bad thing, that could be from cybersecurity concerns, that could be intellectual property theft, it could be geopolitical concerns like I opened up with, or a really big topic right now, which is sustainability and ESG. So versus focusing on globalization versus nearshoring and reshoring, which is very limited based on cost structures, access to labor, access to raw materials, I honestly think it's more of the era of transparency, and that's really what the priority is.
All right, let me ask the audience a question real quick. Raise your hand if over the last year you've been in a conversation with your family about supply chains and shipping. All right, I don't think that would have been the case before COVID, and I think we've seen it change a lot. And the reason it's so important, and the reason everybody raised their hand, is because when we think about globalization, we're really talking about the global supply chain. And that is how we effectively have improved the quality of life for many people in this room. The products you buy, the variety of the food that you get to eat, it's all based on the fact that we can move stuff around the world. And if you think about the question you just asked, is that change because of politics? It's changing. Globalization, or the global supply chain is certainly not dead.
No.
It's not possible. If you just look at the fundamentals, natural resources are distributed in different ways all around the world. It's not evenly distributed around the world. No. Labor costs, levels of education are not distributed evenly. No. So you have to think about the comparative advantages of each of those for inventing and producing and shipping goods. And so globalization will exist as long as people want to have this quality of life at an affordable level and be able to experience things from around the world. I think the big challenge we're facing now, though, is for years, companies made the assumption that effectively, like, global trade and capitalism and the thing I just described would keep companies, would make it so that countries would work together.
Yep.
It would keep some stability in the world because we're all we're all working together from a business perspective, and therefore it's in everyone's interest to make it continue to work. And that's led to a more capitalist, China that we've been able to do all this.
That risk was underpriced? That effectively,
that's right. And people also assumed just in time. We have these global companies. I can get things shipped in the air. I can get things shipped on the ocean. I can move things. I have factories around the world that can produce just in time. So there was this expectation of predictable supply chain delivery of products and stable geopolitical relationships that allow this trade to happen. Both of those have significantly changed in the last 2 years. And that is making it impossible to predict what's going to happen, which leads to disruption. If you can't predict the supply chain, you cannot prepare for what you need to move, and you can't price it. The venture capitalists up here before were talking about pricing companies. Pricing transportation and freight and supply chains is also hard when it's unpredictable. So I think the data that you're talking about, the transparency that you're building, is extremely important for getting a handle on what's going on and trying to figure out, okay, with all these things changing, where should we invest our energy to try to solve this?
Well, and I think to your point, one, I couldn't agree more, and that's why the transparency is so important. I think if anything, the last couple years, we all learned that we are so hyper-connected to each other, which makes it very unpredictable because you don't own every other company in your supply chain, right? And everybody's incentivized for profitability or to make this place a better earth or whatever their mission is. And that leads to unpredictability because most of us are setting strategic planning in corporate offices within our own companies. And so I couldn't agree more. I also think your point about, that just in time is gone, right? So now we're all talking about just in case. And the fact that back in the 90s, we built supply chains to be very fragile, very just in time. The interesting thing with knowledge, with data, with technology, you're actually able to build in some more resiliency and to get a bit more of the predictability that you're talking about by using technology.
And so if we look at that tension between the resiliency and the efficiency, maybe, of the past, or what is the driving force, do you think everything that you've spoken about in terms of the transparency and these other complications, does that add up to some kind of revolution in supply chains, or is it more on the evolution side of things?
I think this is a really interesting topic, and like we were just talking about, this reshoring, nearshoring plays really well in the headlines. You still need access to labor. You need access to raw materials. You need access to infrastructure. And so, all the CEOs I'm talking to, this is a topic that's landed on their desk for the first time in the 20 plus years that I've been in the industry. And so I think that everybody's looking at it. I will also tell you, to the question of efficiency versus resiliency, the conversation, like supply chain used to be a cost center. It's like, how much can we squeeze out of that part of our world to make sure that I was more cost effective? Now, this is actually brand reputation. It's competitive. Consumers are making decisions over the health of the supply chain of who they're going to buy from, which is not necessarily brand loyalty anymore, but it's really who's doing this ethically. Are you buying from companies affiliated with modern slavery?
So it's long-term efficient for your brand to really be having this at front of mind.
Absolutely.
I think that if the players that most companies have sourced products from, and it's all obviously around the world, I'll use China as an example. If China can get things back in order quickly and production and manufacturing can resume, even though parts of Latin America or other parts of the world have lower labor costs, have great ports to move things in, everything's already developed and set up to get it going. And oftentimes people are focusing on just moving forward and getting speed. So I think it's going to be a long time till it really changes. But the question has been raised, and it's been raised in a way that I've never seen before. And so now you're seeing companies, and I was at an event and someone said, let's have a whole conference on nearshoring. Like, this idea came up, right? And I know people that are thinking about it. Look, we can use technology in manufacturing to lower the cost of producing goods, where the labor cost differences around the world don't matter as much. And that would be better. So there's a lot of people thinking about how to use technology from a manufacturing perspective, thinking about what can we do to create alternatives to the supply chain, because I think a lot of people were just shell-shocked at how disrupted their companies were trying to get stuff shipped to the United States. And I mean, if we had unlimited money, we would say, okay, let's build production centers all around the world.
Yep.
Let's have redundancy there. But that's extremely expensive, not just from a cost of development perspective, but from managing your business and communicating your needs.
So that's interesting. Like, one obvious piece of advice to a company might be diversify your supply chain, but that comes with huge costs. It doesn't sound like it's going to be possible for everybody to do that.
Yeah, well, I think all of this comes at a cost. And I would offer back to the question you just asked, when you think about resiliency versus efficiency, we're talking about investments. Yeah. And again, a lot of the CEOs I'm talking to are looking at the next 1, 2, 3 years of investments. Like Dan's just talking about, the next year is optimization of labor. How do I make sure I have the right labor in the right places to give me the resiliency that I look for to be competitive in the market and profitable and getting the right products to the right place at the right time? The following year, we're going to be looking at more investments in technology. More people, more companies are looking at implementing technology in their supply chain. The investments are through the roof in the multiple tens of billions of dollars going into different aspects of the supply chain. But that's over the next 12 months into 23. And then in 24, it is really all about sustainability. We also came out of Scotland this year, and that's really, folks are looking to 2024, 25 for the investment in sustainability and ESG. And so back to this conversation about resiliency versus efficiency, I don't know that this is a cost cutting as much as an investment into where we're going. Alternative sources of supply is just the cost of doing business anymore.
Yeah, on the sustainability point, so what I specialize in my reporting is global trends and how they connect with each other. And I can see a mile off that the climate crisis is going to intersect with supply chains, including from the political pressure to say, not just nearshoring because it makes democratic or geopolitical sense, but because we want to reduce the carbon footprint of different products that we use, for example. How do you see those two things intersecting? How can you use the data in your tools to help companies demonstrate that they're actually doing something useful for the environment and the supply chain?
It's a hard problem. One of the hardest problems, and I had a conversation before coming up on stage, is there's no real good definition around the world yet. And so in the platform, we're tracking about 13 different ones. But again, it's become a CEO and board conversation. And so I think from a how to use our technology, remember, Interos is a mapping and monitoring company. And what has happened, which will be part of the tipping point, is that companies realize they cannot be sustainable. They cannot reduce their carbon footprint by themselves because they're not operating in an isolated and normally not in a linear supply chain.
Yep.
So we're reliant on others. And so from a tech standpoint, by using our platform and mapping out the extended supply chain, they can now just look outside of their direct sources of supply to understand who is not sustainable, who's involved with carbon emissions, flaring, whatever that is, and have a conversation with those folks because of the ripple effect that you're going to receive.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And on the discussion or the topic of whether or not nearshoring would be more sustainable, I don't know, because I think you would still have to get all the materials there, and then you'd be shipping them from that, from, let's say, from Mexico or from the United States to locations, but everything has to get there, so you're still pulling it in from wherever it's being sourced from around the world. Potentially, there are opportunities for that where you'd be shortening the total distance that the good is transported. I remember when I was starting Convoy, I picked up a notebook at a conference, and before I spoke, and I was trying to figure out how many moves that notebook took to get to me. And it was about seven moves in trucks. So 7 different trucks from the origination of the natural resources of the wood to the conference. And when I looked at a bunch of other products, it was between 5 and 10 moves just on the trucking side to get from that natural resource to the end consumer. So there are so many steps. I don't know if moving the production, the manufacturing locally would actually lower the overall footprint of things moving. But I do think that the big issue with regards to sustainability and supply chain is efficiency. And we talk about one of the reasons that it breaks down and the costs go up. I think there was a lot of discussion about how expensive it was to ship over the ocean. Trucking rates, the rate to book a truck to move something in the United States and in North America went up 2 to 3x over the last couple of years. That's incredible. Independent of fuel, just the cost to book because supply and demand was off. And that has to do with efficiency. There's not actually really a shortage of truck drivers. There's a lack of predictability as to when they will be needed where, and a lack of orchestration to understand how to assign the right truck driver to the right job just in domestic trucking.
To what extent can we use AI tools to mitigate some of that risk or to reduce that unpredictability?
So there's a huge opportunity. In the United States, I don't know the statistic for Canada, I'm guessing it's pretty similar. About 35% of the time when you see a truck running down the highway, it's empty. Either going to pick something up or heading back home, empty. Trucks spend hours waiting at facilities, just burning fuel. They have hours of service. There's so many variables that have to be computed and considered to optimize a network. And all these, I mentioned there's 18,000 brokers matching these companies together. It's so fragmented. There's almost 1 million small trucking companies in the US. So, I mean, that's actually what Convoy's doing, right? We're putting all these companies onto a single platform. We can then look at all the jobs coming into the network. What's the pickup time, the drop-off time, the pickup location, the drop-off location, what equipment type is required, what are all the variables, and can I stitch 2 or 3 of those jobs together into a round trip or into a loop and offer that as a single job, and then match it to a carrier that I know is physically in the right spot. That is what technology can do. It can solve these complex matching and ranking and prioritization problems.
And we're down to our last minute and a half, so I'm going to cut you off and move to a final question. You know, as a generalist, when I think of supply chains, I think of something like shipping containers or the opening up of China as like the big revolutions of the last 50, 100 years. Is there anything else you see on the horizon that might match that? And if not, what are you most excited about in your field right now?
So personally, where Dan was just going a minute ago, the use of technology, the power of AI is there's no lag time, and it does a lot of the matching you said. So whether it's cost efficiency, optimization, brand reputation, competitiveness, access to better sources, technologies exists, and it enables you to do that, and that's what excites me.
Yeah, you're right. Physical innovation, like the container, the trailer, just intermodal, or the ability to transfer goods between different sort of objects that are shipping them, has been a huge innovation that's allowed for much more trade, especially globally. I think that the future, the next 10 years, is going to be about optimizing that system. That is going to be what's going to drive the most efficiency, the most reduction in waste. Maybe after 10 years, it will be autonomous vehicle transportation or different modes where you can actually deliver more precisely, more quickly, with lower cost, and with autonomous vehicles.
There you go, everyone. Globalization is surviving. I think that is the takeaway from this session, but it is going to be a bit more political and tech-driven than the version that your parents grew up with. Ben, Jennifer, thank you so much. Dan, sorry.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.